All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Jeremy Wernick. I'm a licensed clinical social worker and a clinical assistant professor here in the Department of Adolescent Psychiatry. I'm also the director of our Adolescent Dialectical Behavior Therapy program. Today, our topic is going to be relational mindfulness, the what's and the hows of improving your connection with your child. We're going to cover a variety of different things today, some specific skills for practicing relational mindfulness, as well as talking about some specific barriers to relational mindfulness. And we'll go ahead and get started and leave a few minutes for questions at the end. So briefly, we'll talk first about getting us on the same page about what a definition of relational mindfulness is, talk about identifying some of the specific factors that interfere with relational mindfulness in families and particularly in relationships between parents and their young people. And then how can we specifically go about practicing and integrating relational mindfulness into your parenting style, and leave a few minutes for questions. So, as I said, let's talk about what relational mindfulness actually is. Mindfulness is a topic that's gotten a lot of attention in recent years, and I think there's a lot of maybe specific ideas or even misconceptions out there about what mindfulness really is. So, on the individual level, when we think about practicing mindfulness as an individual, we're really talking about two things. We're talking about having both an open mind and a focused mind at the same time. So what we're trying to do is have our mind be open to full awareness of our thoughts, our feelings, our emotions, our urges, and the sensations we are having without judgment. Though without judgment is a particularly important aspect of practicing mindfulness because we're not trying to interpret, frankly, whether or not we're doing mindfulness right. If we are open to experiencing everything, we are practicing mindfulness while also focusing our attention on one thing at a time. Multitasking is sort of the antithesis of practicing mindfulness. But when we think about being mindful, we're thinking about the practice of, say, noticing that your mind is wandering and bringing yourself back to focusing on one thing in the moment. So if we think about any mindfulness practice that you would do as an individual, relational mindfulness is almost exactly the same, but with a few specific caveats. So relational mindfulness we can understand as the practice of also being fully aware and open, not just to our experiences, but also to the experiences of others without judgment, bringing our awareness of what's going on in our relationships and into a specific interaction with a person with openness and non-judgmentalness. And then the second piece here would being able to focus our attention on one thing at a time. And for the purposes of this webinar, focusing our attention on the intention of building connection. Most people want to have a meaningful, great connection with their child. And sometimes our lack of focus, our lack of mindfulness interferes with that goal being primary. We got caught up on all of the other responsibilities we have as a parent or all of the other things going on in our environment, and that connection ends up becoming secondary. So when we're talking about using relational mindfulness, what we're really talking about is increasing your awareness of the moment that you're in with your child and your ability to focus your attention on that goal of being better connected and building a relationship that's going to have more compassion and more reliance and reciprocity. So when we're thinking about relational mindfulness, and this is the same definition you just saw at the top, what we're really talking about is having a few specific skills so that you can practice relational mindfulness like any other skill that you've learned over the course of your life. So in order to practice relational mindfulness, we need to be able to see interactions with your children without judgment. That doesn't mean you never have judgments, but if we're talking about mindfulness, we're talking about the practice of being open to the reality that you're judging, noticing the judgment, and refocusing your attention to the present moment and not letting that judgment carry you away and not letting that judgment inform all the decisions you make as a parent. So we need to be able to see the interaction in front of us exactly as it is without judgment. And we need to be able to practice directing our attention to the present moment and away from all the factors that we're going to discuss in just a moment that ultimately interfere with staying connected. So what we want to be able to do is notice and then act on opportunities for connection just as often as you notice and act on opportunities to provide direction. One of the things that we'll discuss that really gets in the way of relational mindfulness is all of your other responsibilities as a parent. Very often, parents or caretakers fall into the trap of only providing direction, feedback, and information to their kids. All of those things are really important aspects of parenting and helping a young person develop and learn from a variety of different experiences. But when you become sort of a task manager, as I like to call it, a lot of those tasks usually interfere with feeling connected in a relationship. And we know this, right? Like when we are in a caretaking role that becomes a very important responsibility, but it sometimes interferes with us feeling like we've got that warmth and reciprocity in a relationship that we really want. And we want to think about relational mindfulness and building that warmth and reciprocity as something that actually makes the directions and feedback you give your kids a much easier kid to swallow. So, what we're thinking about here is a few specific skills that we need to be able to practice in order to keep that connection at the forefront of our relationships rather than only being problem solving focused. So, as I've already alluded to, there's plenty of things that interfere with relational mindfulness, but the main one we're going to spend some more time talking about are our judgments and interpretations. So, on the left side here in black, what we're really saying is that having judgments or having assumptions or interpretations about your child's behavior is ultimately a distraction and typically limits the scope of a conversation. If you're really fixated on one way of seeing your child, or if you're really worried and overwhelmed about one specific behavior, that usually limits the scope of what we're able to see and what we're willing to talk about. And it becomes a distraction from the connection we're trying to build. And really importantly, what your own judgments and interpretations tend to do is push you further into what we would call emotion mind. If you look at the Venn diagram here at the bottom, you see there's sort of three states of mind that we want to consider, not just in terms of what state of mind we're in, but what state of mind do we see our children in? And so if we're thinking about this in terms of the graphic, all of us have the capacity to be in reasonable mind, emotional mind, or wise mind. My shorthand for this is that reasonable mind is what we think about the world. It is the way we see the world exclusively using facts, reason, and logic. Emotion mind is when we see the world only based on emotion. It's how we feel about the world. This is when we're so overwhelmed with an emotional response that we're almost on autopilot. We're not really thinking critically, and we're not thinking about all of our goals. The emotion mind tends to interfere with connection because if we're so overwhelmed, worried, anxious, or focused on just one thing that we're feeling, and we're not focusing on the feelings of the other person, usually we might end up making parenting decisions that we don't actually follow through on. And the example I sometimes give for this is a parent who's really overwhelmed and upset with their child, and they don't quite understand why their child isn't being obedient or responding to the limits that they're trying to set. And then maybe in a moment of your own distress, you say, give me your phone. You're not going to have it until I say that you can have it back, or you're not allowed to go to your friend's birthday party, or I'm going to take this away from you. And then maybe once you calm down, you realize, oh, that was a little harsh, or maybe I don't actually want to follow through on that. And actually, that breeds more disconnection because what that message sends is that you're not a consistent authority figure or that you're not consistently able to follow through on the limits that you want to set. And that lack of consistency is something that actually drives further emotion mind because then maybe you're frustrated with yourself, you feel guilty for how you handled something. So our judgments and interpretations that push us into emotion mind tend to get in the way of building connections and those emotional experiences that are more positive. Because our goal here is to use both reasonable mind and emotion mind at the same time. We want to take what we think about the world, what we feel about the world, and come to a place where we can make decisions based on what we know to be true, using both facts, reason, logic, and the emotional side of what we're talking about. Because sometimes when we parent or try and connect with someone only focused on our judgments and interpretations, we tend to not come to conclusions that are super compassionate, or we end up increasing our own suffering, right? If I'm walking around thinking, my child is always disrespectful, they never listen to what I'm saying, I'm so ineffective. If I'm only focused on those interpretations repeatedly and I'm ruminating on it, I might take a situation that maybe I could look at using a different approach and end up stewing in it because I'm so stuck on that one judgment, that one interpretation. Therefore, not just decreasing my compassion for my child, but also increasing my own suffering. So, our solution to this, the thing that helps us overcome what interferes with relational mindfulness, is practicing using facts and curiosity in all of our interactions. And this really goes into what I was saying before about the idea of being open to different ways of seeing things and being focused on building connection. So we're going to use facts and curiosity to help us focus our attention on the present moment to avoid only being an emotion mind, to help us better balance the emotion mind and the reasonable mind, and generally try and reduce tension in our interactions and improve our sense of connection. So some examples of what this would look like, meaning practicing the facts and curiosity, is on the left side of these bullet points. You'll see that in black, we have examples of common judgments and interpretations that either parents will say out loud or think to themselves. And then on the right side in this orange color, you'll see an example of what using facts or curiosity, what might sound like as an alternative. So if the judgment and interpretation is they're being so disrespectful, let's try just stating the facts. They started crying and walked away while I was talking to them. I might be less dysregulated and might feel less overwhelmed if I practice just sticking to the facts of what happened instead of jumping to the conclusion or the interpretation that that specific behavior, crying and walking away, was inherently disrespectful. The same goes for you always avoid doing your homework. That all or nothing language is always going to lead to a more emotional response from people, versus facts and curiosity might sound like, I notice that sometimes you watch YouTube before you start your homework, right? The facts and curiosity help us focus on the moment that we're in rather than the judgments and interpretations that tend to bring us into more generalizations about behavior. If I'm thinking that this person just needs to try harder next time, maybe instead I use curiosity and I think, how are you feeling about things not going the way you wanted? Or like maybe your kid is coming to you and saying that something didn't go well, and you're thinking, well, all right, you just needed to try harder, you needed to do more, you needed to focus. I wonder if curiosity would help us build more connection to better understand how they're feeling and to help you be more effective relational mindfulness wise. And so asking a question is sometimes a nice starting point instead of jumping to the judgment and the interpretation. And the same is true if we're having the thought or having the judgment, they never do what I ask. How could we phrase that in terms of more facts and using curiosity? We might say, based on facts, the last two times I asked you to do this, you didn't do it. What is getting in the way of this getting done? So rather than assuming or jumping to a conclusion about maybe what the intention was of this young person or using all or nothing language that's going to keep me really upset, I try and use the facts. The last two times I asked, you didn't do it, not in a harsh, punitive way. It's just objectively a fact, it didn't happen. And then I ask a curious question, like what actually is getting in the way? Rather than assuming that as the parent or the adult, I already know the answer to that question, building that connection and staying open to the possibility that you don't actually know everything is part of what builds that curiosity and helps increase that sense of connection. So facts and curiosity is one way that we can overcome some of the things that interfere with being both open and focused non-judgmentally in our relationships with young people. To that end, using facts and curiosity is an example of one thing that we can practice, but let's break this down even further into better understanding what actually we need to consistently integrate into our parenting style that's more tangible so that we can practice relational mindfulness, across ages and across different situations with young people. So, as I mentioned, our interpretations are a big aspect of what interferes with practicing relational mindfulness, in part because it creates our own emotional responses that we sometimes don't know how to get past, and it interferes with interpreting things in a more compassionate, open, and non-judgmental way. So, usually what's missing for a lot of people is that, understandably, as a parent, you're overwhelmed with a lot of responsibilities and a lot of different problems to solve, emotional problems to solve, logistical problems to solve. And often, what gets in the way of being relationally mindful is that we stop pushing ourselves to take the child's perspective, or we assume that we already know what the perspective of the child is because maybe in theory we've known them their entire life and it makes sense that we have some conclusions to draw. But realistically, as new challenges come and as your kids grow, there's going to be things about the way that they think that we can't know and that we can't fully understand unless we ask. So in this situation, this cartoon here, we've got two parents. Maybe they say something like, why can't you just talk to me instead of lashing out at me? Or, hey, I'm the parent, respect my authority, do what I say. But we're really missing everything in this speech bubble. Or if we say, hey, you didn't do this, you're grounded, or hey, you didn't do this, I'm taking this away from you, and we're not practicing relational mindfulness, we might miss that part of the problem we're maybe creating is that maybe we've got all of these things inside the kid's speech bubble. Maybe they're thinking, wow, they never notice when I'm trying. Ugh, I can't do anything right. I really need some space right now. Now's not a good time for me. Why do they think what I'm saying is unimportant? And I'm really embarrassed actually that I need more help than I can ask for. And if we don't practice relational mindfulness and don't practice being open to the possibility that our judgments are not facts, we end up missing out on a lot. So what we want to do is practice what we would call the think skill. This is borrowed from dialectical behavior therapy. It's sort of maybe a complicated, but I think a helpful shorthand acronym to think about exactly what we want to do to practice relational mindfulness. And the shorthand here is that we want to think. We want to think about it, the situation from the child's perspective. We want to practice having empathy for what the child may be feeling like or what they may be thinking. We want to get better at identifying when we have an automatic interpretation and think of alternatives. We want to notice maybe ways that this young person has been trying or notice ways that they have been struggling that maybe we haven't given as much attention to. And we want to always use kindness in our approach. I have really never worked with or met with a parent who doesn't want to be empathic and kind towards their child. And usually our own emotional response gets in the way of feeling like we have the capacity or the time to slow things down and have more empathy and use more kindness. So our goal with some of these skills is to help you practice how you can do this more automatically to get in a rhythm of more easily practicing relational mindfulness so that your interpretations and judgments don't get in the way of your parenting. So to break this down a little bit, like what are some questions that I would ask myself if I was trying to more actively practice thinking about things from the child's perspective or actively practice having more empathy? It might sound like some of these questions. Really asking yourself, what is it like having a parent ask you to do something and not follow through? Rather than just focusing on the fact that they didn't follow through, being curious about what must it feel like to have your parent come into your room or to reach out to you and say, "Hey, you didn't do this. I wonder how that's making them feel. What might this young person need to learn to do before I expect them to do it?" Even if you think that they should already know how to do it, or maybe their older sibling knew how to do it at this age, or maybe you knew how to do it at this age, or maybe they've even done it in the past. Is there something I'm missing that they actually need to learn how to do before I can ask them to do it? What have my other actions with them been like today? Is this a day where I've asked them to do 10 different things, or we've already had 2 or 3 different fights? What must it be like? And is it really the right time right now to bring up my next concern? Is piling on actually going to get in the way of building connection and being relationally mindful? Part of this mindfulness is the give and take in relationships. And sometimes parents have a hard time acknowledging that while you may be the more experienced person who is deserving of authority and respect in your household, your kid is also an individual, which means that sometimes conversations need to also be on their terms, not just because it's respectful to them, but also it might help you feel more effective if you're coming to your kid at a time where they're better able to hear what you're saying. And if we don't actually think about it from their perspective, we might end up sort of bulldozing and saying, no, like I'm the parent, we need to do this now. When in reality, if we want to have some empathy, if it's been a hard rest of the day and you've already been on them for a lot of stuff, maybe you need to take a back seat and pause and come back to the conversation tomorrow. Or thinking about things like what they may be thinking or feeling while I say this to them, and how have I handled this in the past, and how are they expecting me to respond? This last piece is really important, is if part of the reason that you're attending this webinar or that you're thinking about relational mindfulness is because this is something you've struggled with in the past, or you're having a hard time building a connection with your kid, you need to also remember that we learn things in our relationships. So if for the past years or the past several months, you've responded a particular way to your young person in your life, you need to also then understand that you may come to them practicing your relational mindfulness skills and they still may bristle or be upset with you or not be receptive because they're anticipating a response based on past experiences. So part of mindfulness is not just the mindfulness of the present moment, but the mindfulness of the context for your relationship. We all know this feeling, right? If you have arguments with someone often, the next time you go to speak to them, you're already kind of primed to assume it's going to become an argument. So part of practicing mindfulness is just being focused on the present moment and thinking about how these situations have been handled in the past so that you can have some more compassion and empathy for what their knee-jerk reaction might be to a new situation that comes up in the present. The next piece of this that we've already talked about a little bit, but to give you some more concrete examples here, is using facts and curiosity to avoid to avoid being judgmental, because our interpretations tend to get in the way. And so what we like to have people practice is usually we're all pretty good at identifying the negative interpretation, the thing that we maybe negatively assumed about the young person in our life. And so one of the things that you can challenge yourself to do, or if you have a partner or someone else in your family to help you with this, generating in every situation a positive, a neutral, and a benefit of the doubt interpretation of your child's behavior. So in this scenario, a parent is upset when they come home from work and find that their teen is fixed to their phone. The parent assumes that the teen doesn't care about spending time with the family. That's the negative interpretation. It's not actually a fact, it's an interpretation. And so some examples of positive or neutral or benefit of the doubt interpretations might be maybe the teen feels supported by their friends on social media, and so it makes sense that they enjoy spending time connecting with them on the phone. A neutral interpretation might be the teen actually does care about spending time with the family and they just didn't notice that you came home. It's neutral. Or the teen isn't aware that you want to spend time with them when you get home from work. Is this something that you've actually explicitly told them that you want and that you've asked for? So, of course, in every situation, there's a variety of different interpretations that can come up. And the goal here isn't to choose one and say, okay, this is the right interpretation. The goal is if you're going to practice having that open mind that's required for mindfulness, we need to consider that all of these interpretations are possible. It's possible that the teen wants nothing to do with spending time with the family. And it's also possible that they're spending time with their friends online because it makes them feel good, and that's human and that makes sense. It's also possible that they just didn't notice you came home. It's possible that they don't realize it's an expectation you have that they need to put down their phone and come and talk to you, unless it's an expectation that you've set. So identifying these automatic interpretations and using positive, neutral, and benefit of the doubt helps you move away from just being an emotion mind while parenting to being in a wiser mind. Another example that I like to use here is, a child becomes angry and cries when a parent sets limits. They're telling a kid they can't do something or setting some sort of limit, and the parent thinks that the child is being disrespectful and overdramatic. You can hear already those words, those judgments, those interpretations. So the negative interpretation is that the child is being disrespectful and overdramatic. So some positive, neutral, or benefit of doubt interpretations. Maybe the child is learning to tolerate an age-appropriate limit, and that's challenging for all children. That's a positive way of looking at it. They're learning something from this experience, and even though they're having a big emotional reaction, it's age appropriate. A neutral fact, just the child is crying, like stating a fact of what's in front of you instead of spiraling into the interpretations about it. And some benefit of the doubt interpretations might be, the child feels disappointed and doesn't know how to communicate or tolerate what they're feeling. Right? Anybody in their situation might have a hard time what they're dealing with, and they feel disappointed and they don't know how to deal with it. Or maybe the limit was actually set at a time when the child was already vulnerable. They were tired, they were hungry, they were upset, and they became overwhelmed, giving them the benefit of the doubt. You can see here already that some of these positive, neutral, or benefit of the doubt interpretations lend itself to having a more compassionate view of the kid, to understanding the context, to understanding what they might have been going through, and using their perspective to help you feel like you can connect with them more around the experience they're having, instead of feeling maybe alienated or stuck on a negative judgment of them that ultimately interferes with your approach. And the last piece of the think skill is noticing how they've been trying and using kindness in your approach. So back to this idea of perspective taking and asking yourself some questions to help you build some more compassion so that you're more open to and willing to focus your attention on building that connection. Maybe in this scenario, it's finals week and a teen doesn't finish the chores that you ask them to do. You approach them to tell them that the consequence for not finishing the chores and tell them something like, you're too old to not take responsibility for your actions, and they start yelling at you. So you can hear the negative interpretation a little bit there. You're too old. You should be able to deal with this. Here's a consequence. And they start yelling. They get upset. So if we have to approach this by trying to build connection and use relational mindfulness by noticing ways they're trying and using kindness, we have to consider, are there other ways that the teen has made an effort to do things during the week? Or did they do some of their chores, but not all of them? And have you, as the parent, the authority figure, actually provided enough praise for all of the other efforts they've made in other areas of their life, not just their chores? Are there ways that you can go out of your way to notice, acknowledge, and praise the things that they're doing well? Or are your interactions just solely about things they've done wrong? And what other factors in their life may have interfered with finishing the chores? And how was your tone of voice when you approached them? Maybe the consequence you're giving them is natural and reasonable, and maybe the behaviors that they engaged in, the chores they didn't do, were really frustrating, and maybe you've asked them many times. And did you knock on their door really aggressively? And did you raise your voice immediately? Were you curt with them? Like, did your tone of voice actually contribute to some of their dysregulation also? So the goal of using these skills is to help build a level playing field, to be curious so that you can take a more compassionate, calmer, kind approach to things, and notice when your own judgments, interpretations are interfering with the goal that you have, which is to build connection and have more warmth and reciprocity. So ultimately, what we're talking about here, big picture, is we want to use non-judgmental language and practice our own perspective taking skills to help us challenge assumptions that are impacting our own distress, our own emotions. We want to practice using a positive, neutral, and benefit of the doubt interpretation to help increase our compassion and our willingness to connect with more kindness. And we didn't talk about this as much, but thinking about it from the perspective of debriefing interactions with your kid, coming back and asking questions about how they felt is a really helpful way to bridge the gap between maybe a moment of conflict to then building connection and response to it. And one of the other things we would recommend is figuring out this balance. How many times today have I used an interaction in a more problem-solving way versus used an interaction and taken an opportunity with my kid to actually answer some questions and talk to them about how they're feeling? The last piece here is using all of these skills to help yourself use an easy manner in your approach so that you're calmer and you're better able to manage all of the different priorities you have in your relationship. So in our last couple minutes here, we'll set aside some time for questions. So remember that you can submit questions by typing them into the Q&A function of your control panel, and I'm happy to answer any questions we have now. While we're waiting for questions to come in, one of the common things that comes up in discussing relational mindfulness and mindfulness in relationships is, how do we know if what we're dealing with is evidence of maybe like a bigger mental health problem, a specific disorder, or just kind of the growing pains of the teenage years? And I think that it really actually doesn't matter the answer to that question, meaning that of course it's important to know if someone is struggling with like a specific disorder that needs to be treated, or if someone is a teenager who's struggling with very age appropriate things. In either scenario, practicing relational mindfulness is going to reduce the reactivity in that relationship and is going to help build connection so that you can help either way. If someone's struggling with a very specific problem, relational mindfulness is going to help you better understand and define the problem. And if someone's struggling with really age appropriate stuff throughout their adolescence, you being a reciprocal, warm person who can be both a guide for support and problem solving while also an open door that's non judgmental is also going to do us a lot in terms of keeping kids safe, keeping the lines of communication open, because relational mindfulness is really about keeping relationships going and making them long lasting rather than them being something that is really tenuous and uncomfortable for everyone involved. We'll wait just a moment for any other questions and then we'll wrap up. Okay. So it looks like we don't have any questions for today. Thank you all for joining us. Before we conclude, we'd love for you to check out our Instagram page. We'd love for you to go ahead and give us a follow right now. Our Early Childhood Service through the Child Study Center is managing our Instagram account, where we share a lot of valuable insights and resources on parenting young children. You can quickly give us a follow by scanning the QR code on your screen or by clicking the link in the chat. Also, don't forget to visit nyulangone.org/CSC webinars to find a full list of our upcoming webinars and access recordings of past sessions. We really hope you stay connected and see you at our future events. Thank you again. We really appreciate your time and have a great day.